September 29th, 1944, the Apennine Mountains. The bells of San Martino di Caprara began their morning call at 5:30, just as they had every dawn for 217 years. Father Giovanni Martini's hands trembled slightly as he pulled the rope, not from weakness, though he was 63 and his joints ached in the mountain cold, but from something else. Something he couldn't name yet. The bronze voice echoed across the valley, bouncing off chestnut trees already dressed in autumn copper. Below, in the scattered stone houses of Monte, families would be stirring. Maria Tonelli, kneading bread. Young Paolo Rossi, milking the goats. Old Benito probably already in his vineyard, inspecting the grapes that would never become wine. Giovanni released the rope and stepped back into the sacristy. The stone floor was cold, even through his worn shoes. He'd owned these shoes since 1936, before the war, before the Germans, before the partisans made the mountains dangerous for everyone caught between them. He lit a candle near the small mirror and studied his reflection. Deep lines framed his eyes. His cassock, mended a dozen times, hung loose on shoulders that had grown thin, but his hands were steady now as he prepared for morning mass. Outside, footsteps on gravel. Padre Martini? A woman's voice, hushed and urgent. He opened the door. Teresa Baldi stood there, her shawl pulled tight despite the mild morning. Her son Marco, barely 13, stood behind her, eyes wide with the particular fear Giovanni had seen too often these past months. "They're coming," Teresa whispered. "The Germans." Marco saw them from the ridge, hundreds of them. Giovanni's chest tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Hundreds?" "At least 2 companies, Padre. With trucks. Moving up the valley road." Marco's voice cracked as he spoke. "They burned Casaglia last week. Everyone knows what they do." The priest placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "How long do we have? Maybe 2 hours. Maybe less." Giovanni glanced back at his small church, the altar where he'd baptized half the children in these mountains, the pews where 3 generations had prayed, the crucifix his predecessor had carved from olive wood. "Ring the emergency bells," he said quietly. "Tell everyone San Martino, everyone who can walk." Teresa's eyes filled. "You're sure, Padre?" "I'm sure. Go now." As they ran down the path, Giovanni walked back to the bell tower. He gripped the rope. Different bell, different tone. 3 sharp rings. Pause. 3 more. Pause. 3 more. The emergency call. Every soul within hearing knew what it meant. Before we continue into what happened that morning, hit subscribe. These stories deserve to be remembered, every one of them. By 7 o'clock, they came. First, the Benzoni family, Giuseppe carrying his infant daughter, his wife Lucia leading their 2 older boys by hand. Then the Morandi sisters, both over 70, helping each other up the steep path. The Colombo family. The Pasquale children, orphaned 3 months ago when their parents were caught between partisan fire and German reprisal. Giovanni stood at the church door, ushering them inside. "Quietly now, inside. There's room for everyone. Padre, shouldn't we go higher?" Giuseppe asked. "Into the forests?" "The forests are where the partisans hide," Giovanni replied. "The Germans shoot anyone they find there. At least here, in God's house, we have sanctuary." He didn't fully believe it. But what else could he tell them? More came. Mario Peretti, who'd lost his leg at Monte Cassino and hobbled on crutches. Anna Venturi, with her 3 daughters. Families carrying blankets, loaves of bread, everything precious they could grab in minutes. By 8 o'clock, over 150 people packed the small church. The morning sun slanted through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above their heads. Children whimpered. Mothers shushed them. Old men sat with hands clasped, lips moving in silent prayer. Giovanni walked to the altar. Every eye followed him. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that holds its breath. "My beloved children," he began, his voice filling the stone space. "I know you're frightened. I know you've heard what happened at Casaglia, at Serpiano. I know you're wondering if these walls can protect you." He paused, looking at their faces. Paolo Rossi, the boy who'd served as his altar boy for 4 years. Maria Tonelli, who'd brought him soup every week since his sister died. Faces he'd known since they were born. Faces he'd married. Faces whose confessions he'd heard and absolved. "I cannot promise you the Germans will respect this sanctuary," he continued. "I cannot promise they'll see women and children and grandfathers and choose mercy. I cannot promise you tomorrow." Teresa Baldi was crying silently, clutching Marco. "But I can promise you this. God sees. You. Every one of you. He knows your names. He counts every hair on your heads. And whatever happens today, whatever comes through that door, your souls are his, and no soldier's rifle can touch them." Someone in the back, old Benito said hoarsely, "Will you hear confession, Padre?" Giovanni nodded. "Yes. All who wish for it." They formed a line. One by one, they knelt beside him in the small confessional. They whispered their sins, small things, human things. Giuseppe confessed jealousy toward his brother. Anna confessed lying to her neighbor. Young Paolo confessed stealing grapes from old Benito's vineyard. Giovanni absolved them all, making the sign of the cross over each bowed head, murmuring the ancient words that had been murmured over sinners for 2,000 years. Ego te absolvo. Outside, in the distance, the first sounds of trucks echoing up the mountain road. By 9:30, the sounds were closer. Engine noise, shouted commands in German, the occasional crack of a rifle. Inside San Martino, the children had grown quieter, that eerie quiet that comes when even the youngest senses danger beyond their understanding. Giovanni climbed the 3 steps to his simple pulpit. His sermon notes, prepared days ago for an ordinary Sunday, lay there. He pushed them aside. "In the Gospel of John," he began, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his chest, "Jesus tells us, 'Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends.'" The congregation watched him with desperate attention, as if his words were rope thrown to drowning swimmers. "I have lived in these mountains for 38 years. I have baptized your children. I have buried your dead. I have blessed your marriages, and heard your fears, and shared your bread. You are not my congregation, you are my family." Maria Tonelli's hand found her rosary, fingers working the beads. "When I was a young priest in Roma, before I came here, I asked my bishop, 'What is a priest's duty?' He told me, 'To stand between the people and the darkness, to be a light, even if that light costs you everything.'" Outside, the engine sound stopped, very close now. "I see some of you looking at that door, wondering when it will open, wondering what will come through." Teresa held Marco tighter. "I want you to listen to me now, not as your priest, but as your brother, as someone who has loved you and been loved by you." Giovanni's voice grew softer, forcing them to lean forward, to focus entirely on his words instead of the sounds outside. "This church has stood for 2 centuries. These stones have witnessed plague and famine and war. They have witnessed births and deaths, joy and grief, and they have witnessed something else. They have witnessed faith. The sound of boots on gravel now, many boots. Faith is not the belief that God will spare you from suffering. Faith is the trust that God will not abandon you inside it." Harsh voices outside, German, shouting. "Faith is knowing that your children's souls cannot be broken by bullets, that your mother's prayers rise higher than any flame. That love, true love, the love that binds us together in this room, is stronger than any hate, any evil, any darkness this world can produce." A pounding on the door, violent, demanding. Giovanni didn't flinch. He raised his hand in blessing over the congregation, his voice rising to fill the space, to drown out the horror pressing against the threshold. "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." The door burst open. Sunlight flooded in, silhouetting the figures that entered. German soldiers, 16, 17-year-old boys in SS uniforms, rifles raised, eyes hard with orders they'd been trained not to question. An officer stepped forward, Hauptsturmführer, something Giovanni didn't catch the name. He barked in broken Italian. Out. Everyone out. Now. No one moved. The officer fired his pistol into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down. Out. Giovanni descended from the pulpit slowly, deliberately. These are civilians. Women. Children. Old men. They have done nothing. Silence. The officer's face was flushed. This village harbors partisans, supplies the terrorists. By order of Field Marshal Kesselring, all persons are to be— These children are 5 years old, Giovanni interrupted, his voice calm but carrying. That baby is 3 months old. Are they terrorists? The officer's jaw worked. For a moment, just a moment, something human flickered behind his eyes. Then training reasserted itself. Outside. All of you. Or we burn the church with you inside. They filed out into the courtyard, a small clearing in front of the church, bordered by chestnut trees and a low stone wall. More soldiers waited. At least 50. They formed a perimeter, rifles ready. The officer barked orders. The soldiers began, separating them, men to the right, women and children to the left. No! Teresa screamed as they pulled Marco away from her. He's a child! He's only 13! A soldier struck her with his rifle butt. She fell. Giovanni moved before thinking, kneeling beside her. Teresa, don't. Another soldier grabbed Giovanni by his cassock, hauling him to the men's group. The fabric tore, buttons scattered on the ground. They forced the men against the church wall. 23 of them, including Giovanni and Marco and Paolo and old Benito with his gnarled hands that had tended vines for 60 years. The women and children, over 100, were herded toward the cemetery, 50 meters away, where another squad of soldiers waited. Giovanni's mind raced through desperate calculations. Appeals to mercy, appeals to law, appeals to God. But when he looked at the young faces of the SS soldiers, these boys who'd been fed hate since they could walk, he saw nothing that would respond to appeals. The Hauptsturmführer walked slowly down the line of men. He stopped in front of Giuseppe Benzoni. You, where are the partisans? I don't know, Giuseppe whispered. Liar. The officer turned to his men. Make them talk. They started with old Benito. 2 soldiers grabbed him, dragged him forward, and threw him to the ground. One kicked him in the ribs. Again. The old man coughed blood but said nothing because there was nothing to say. He didn't know where the partisans were. None of them did. The partisans came down from higher mountains, took what they needed, and disappeared. Giovanni closed his eyes, not from cowardice, but because he was praying faster and more fervently than he'd ever prayed in his life. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. The beating stopped. Benito lay still. The officer turned to the others. Who's next? Who wants to talk? Silence. Then, from down the path toward the cemetery, a sound that stopped every heart. Gunfire. Not single shots, but sustained bursts. Automatic weapons. For 30 seconds. 40. A minute. Then, silence again. Teresa's scream echoed across the valley, an animal sound, raw and primal, cut short by another burst of fire. Giovanni opened his eyes. I looked at the officer. The young face was pale now, sweat on the forehead despite the cool morning. Monsters, Giovanni said quietly. You are children playing at being monsters, and you will never, never wash this blood from your souls. The officer's hand shook as he raised his pistol. Line them up, he said to his men. His voice was hollow. They forced the men into a single line against the church wall. Giovanni found himself between Marco and Giuseppe. The boy was weeping silently. The man was praying fast, desperate Hail Marys running together into one continuous plea. Giovanni reached out, took each of their hands. Look at me, he said softly. Both of you, look at me. They did, and in their eyes, Giovanni saw such fear, such incomprehension, such desperate hope that he might somehow save them. He couldn't. but he could give them something else. "Close your eyes," he whispered. "Close them and listen only to my voice." They closed their eyes. So did the others, near enough to hear. "The Lord is my shepherd," Giovanni began, his voice barely audible over the soldiers loading their rifles. "I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." The soldiers raised their rifles. "He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." 23 triggers pulled simultaneously. The crack of gunfire echoed across the valley, sending birds fleeing from the chestnut trees. Father Giovanni Martini did not die immediately. The bullet that was meant for his heart struck his shoulder. Instead, the soldier who fired was 16 and had never been killed before, and his hands shook badly. Giovanni fell with the others but remained conscious, lying in blood that was his and wasn't his, listening to the terrible silence that followed the shots. Boots walked past. Someone checked for survivors, not thoroughly, just a quick scan. They wanted to be done with this horror as badly as their victims wanted it to end. "Fire the buildings," the Hauptsturmführer said, his voice flat. "Everything. Leave nothing standing." They did. Giovanni heard the whoosh of flames catching thatch, the crackle of old timber beginning to burn. He heard the soldiers march away, their voices trailing off down the mountain path. He heard trucks starting, engines fading into distance. Then, nothing. Just the fire's growing roar and the wind through the chestnut trees. Giovanni lay still for perhaps an hour, maybe more. Time moves strangely when you're waiting to die. Finally, when he was certain the soldiers had gone, he moved, slowly. Each breath was agony. His shoulder was shattered, blood soaking his torn cassock. He crawled, inches at a time. Past bodies he couldn't look at, past the burning church where he'd said Mass for 38 years, toward the cemetery. He found them there, all of them. Women lying atop their children, having tried to shield them to the last. Old women who'd lived through the First War, only to end here. The infant Giuseppe's daughter still wrapped in her blanket, perfect and tiny and gone. Teresa, Marco, Maria, Anna, Lucia. Over 100 souls who'd trusted him, who'd thought sanctuary meant safety. Giovanni knelt in the center of the cemetery. Kneeling was easier than standing, and he knew he'd never stand again. The sun was high now. It's almost noon. The church bell tower still stood, though flames licked at its base. The bells were silent. With his good hand, Giovanni made the sign of the cross over the bodies nearest him. He didn't have strength for more. Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domine. He whispered, "Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, e lux perpetua luceat ies, and let perpetual light shine upon them." His vision was darkening at the edges. Blood loss, shock. The end is coming. But in that darkness, Giovanni saw something. Not a vision, he wasn't a mystic, just a memory. A morning years ago, when young Paolo had asked him, "Padre, why does God let bad things happen?" And Giovanni had answered, "God doesn't cause bad things, Paolo. People do. People with fear, with hate, with darkness in their hearts. God's job and ours is to be light in response. To choose love, even when the world chooses violence. To forgive, even when forgiveness seems impossible." "Can you forgive anything, Padre?" Giovanni had smiled. "With God's help? Yes, anything." Now, lying in the cemetery of Monte Sole, his life draining into the mountain soil, Giovanni whispered, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." He meant it. Not because the soldiers deserved forgiveness, they didn't. Not because their crime was small, it was monstrous. But because holding hate in his final moments would poison the last thing he had left, his soul. The bells of San Martino would ring again someday. Different bells, after the war, after the ashes cooled. But they would ring, and they would ring for Teresa and Marco and Maria and Anna and old Benito and all the others. They would ring in in defiance of the darkness that tried to silence them forever. Father Giovanni Martini closed his eyes. The wind moved through the chestnut trees, and somewhere, perhaps in memory, perhaps in eternity, the bells began to ring.